Yo, welcome to Wit-Out. I'm excited today. Our podcast about Philly's most intriguing people with the most interesting stories. I'm your host, Dennis Valerino. I'm here with my longtime friend and co-host, Michael Butter Moffitt. Yo, Michael.
Hello, folks.
Michael, you know what my grandfather always said. Danny, everybody got a story, and today our guest has one hell of a story. He's an American author, journalist, lecturer, former criminal justice official. I feel like he has two lives, two careers, Michael.
3 or 4, actually.
Yeah. He didn't start writing his books until he was 50. He writes on a wide range of topics such as medical ethics, history, organized crime, espionage, and sports. Cheese and crackers. He's done it all. Welcome, Alan M. Hornblum. Alan, thanks for coming today. You were born and raised in Philadelphia?
That's correct. Born and bred Philly.
Okay. What was your young life like? Childhood?
Well, it was actually pretty rough. Was born Temple University Hospital in 1947, and the family moved to York Road in Logan for a few years, and from there in the early 50s we moved to the border of East Germantown and West Oak Lane, and it was a little bit rough there. I found out the very first day that I was persona non grata when I'm 5 years old and just meandering down the street, checking out a new neighborhood, a new block, a new venue, which was all sort of stunning to me because it had things I had never seen before, where I lived, in the sense that there were trees on the street, there were front lawns, there were porches, and I didn't come from anything like that, and I was just wandering down the street on my own. And all of a sudden, 5, 7 kids poured out of a house, saw me, recognized me in the sense that I was the new kid on the block and the new kid whose ass they should kick because I was something they didn't like, and that was Jewish. So they came out and they beat the shit out of me, kicked me, punched me, called me all sorts of names, told me I killed this guy, Jesus Christ, who I had never heard of. I knew my name was Alan, but I don't even think I knew my last name. You know, I hadn't started school yet, and it was just a fairly traumatic experience that would remain and be reminded of on a daily basis because I was the only Jew in an all-Catholic neighborhood. And it was pretty rough.
What parish? You remember?
It was St. Benedict's was the school there on Ogons Avenue.
So it's your first taste of anti-Semitism?
It was first,
But
and
not your last?
certainly not my last. I mean, it was something that I had to work through and run from and deal with on a daily basis. And the only thing that got me through it was my ability to stick it out, in the sense that the only thing that they recognized, that they appreciated, was athletic ability. So even though my parents had a small, not particularly profitable corner candy store, these kids were just interested, could I carry a ball across a goal line? Could I hit a home run? Could I make a tackle?
Could you?
Could I run fast? Initially, no, but I worked on it and shed a lot of blood, broke a lot of bones, but then I could finally measure up as somebody who could compete, and that's what they valued. So it's not a youth that I recommend for anybody, but that's what, you know, some of us had to go through back in the day.
What makes you tough? Made you tough.
And you give up a lot of blood that way, and you help out a lot of orthopedic men.
Now, where'd you go to high school?
Went to Olney High.
Did you play sports there?
Ran track and played a lot of cornerball, a lot of football, basketball, all the sports. Became a pretty good athlete in most, if not all of them. Then after high school, went to Penn State.
Main campus?
Main campus.
Happy Valley.
Interesting that my family moved from West Oak Lane area to the northeast the same day I went off to Penn State.
Wow.
So when I first came back from Penn State, it was a totally new neighborhood, and that was the Oxford Circle area.
Okay. Your relationship with your parents?
Fair, nothing particularly
Good or bad?
warm or heartwarming or negative. It was just the three of us, my parents, myself, and a dog that got me through a lot of the tough. Sometimes a dog is your best friend, and that's the way it was for me because there were many incidents where I was not encouraged or allowed to go into somebody else's house. They didn't want me in there, this, that, or the other, but the dog is always happy and
Kind of a
greeting
lonely
you.
upbringing. Those
Yeah,
siblings.
it was pretty tough.
Yeah. What's Happy Valley like in the late? When
It
did
was
you
the
go there?
mid-'60s. It was 1965. It was a growing, thriving university. I was stunned because I had spent the most recent years in the early into the mid-'60s in a totally black environment. What had happened where I lived in that section of Ogons Avenue, and you find that in a lot of neighborhoods in the city, there was the racial transition from white to black. So when
when
my
everybody's going to the
family
suburbs.
moved into East Oak Lane, it was all white and Catholic. When I left there in '65, it was all black.
Were you more accepted as
No,
being Jewish?
no,
with the,
no. It was different.
Just a different.
Now I was the outcast, using your term, because I was white.
Right.
Everybody else was
Different.
black. The neighborhood, I was one of the last white kids to leave there. In fact, I have a hard time thinking of another white kid who was there. So it was one of these periods of formative development that there was a lot of obstacles and a lot of potholes and crevices and gorges and, a lot of fights. And I was stabbed twice before I was even 17 years old. I was shot at. Things that most people don't have to go through were part of my childhood. So when I got to, as you call it, Happy Valley, it was stunning because I no longer had to look behind me when I was walking down the street. I had grown used to, if I'm going anywhere, really checking out where I'm at, who's around me, because somebody could be coming up on my back.
Ironically, we'll find out later in your life, you go back to that.
Yeah.
You go back to that, but we'll find that out later. So you find more acceptance at college. You find
It was.
What are you studying too?
I started in the fields of history and anthropology, and I was only there 1 year. It was a good year. I didn't do particularly well academically because I really wasn't into books. I wasn't into studying. I wasn't into grades. I came out of a neighborhood where most of the guys I played ball with went to Cardinal Doherty. And everything was really geared towards athletics. And in fact, my situation was bad to start with because I wasn't Catholic, and it was only magnified if I had focused on academics and studying and getting good grades, because I would have been beat up for that. The folks who did that were laughed at, scorned, considered a sissy, whatever. What gave you some bona fides in the neighborhood is how tough you were, how fast you were, how well you fought. Could you carry a football? All of these things is where you got your reputation. They couldn't give a shit if you got an A in this or, you wrote a great paper and a teacher patted you on the head. Those were things that were scorned. So I didn't go into college with a particularly good academic background or interest. I struggled in a number of subjects, particularly things like math or languages. I flunked Spanish in both high school and college, but I was very good in things like history and politics and current events. For some reason, those things resonated with me, and I did very well in them. So I could not only hold my own in those areas, but I exceeded most other people. Whereas some of the other things, they were really like an anchor holding me down, holding me back. The real problem occurred after my first year.
Where'd he go?
My father dies.
Oh, sorry to hear
And
that.
he's 55. He dies of a heart attack. And I have to transfer back from the main campus to the Ogons campus at Penn State. So I actually graduated Penn State Ogons.
Okay. Well, you went back
To Philly.
to help your mom out?
Yeah, to
Okay.
run the business. We had a corner candy store,
Right.
and she needed help. I understood that. Wasn't anything I desired or wanted, but those are the obstacles that some folks have to face.
Life brings
Yep.
to you. So, you're working at the candy store. You're also going to
school.
Are you, obviously, how value you're living there. Are you living now back at home and just
Traveling from
Traveling to
Northeast
Ogons?
Philly to Penn State Ogons in Abington, and majored in history. They
When
had
did you graduate?
They had a very good history department there. It was the strongest department at Penn State Ogons, and history was my major, so it worked out well that way. And I graduate in 1969, and from there I go to Villanova, and I get a master's degree in history.
okay?
So, ironically, even though I didn't naturally gravitate to ideas or reading or writing, it was something that I just hung in there with, not really knowing what I wanted to do, but was just good in history and did enjoy it. So I get that master's degree. And what happened at Villanova is interesting because while I was there from 69 to 71, there's tremendous turmoil in America politically and socially. You have a lot of different movements taking place, the women's rights movement, the environmental movement, the anti-war movement, all of these things are occurring. And a lot of young people are caught up in the politics of the day. They want to do something worthwhile with their life instead of just, moving to the main line or making money, what have you. They want to do something that maybe contributes to society or the world. And a number of us gave a lot of thought to different sort of causes and campaigns, and I applied to the Peace Corps. So I thought
After Villanova.
during
During
Villanova,
Villanova.
I applied to the Peace Corps. The problem is month after month after month goes by and not hearing back from the Peace Corps. And I'm not sure what the story is. I'm not hearing anything. But as time is going by, I get involved with a young lady, and the relationship becomes stronger. And then out of nowhere, towards the end of the spring, when I'm finally getting my master's degree, I get a call from Washington that the Peace Corps is very apologetic. They lost my application. But there's good news. They have now found my application. They have shown it to the minister of Botswana. He's very interested in me. They're going to fly me from Philly to Chicago, where the minister is. If that interview goes well, they're going to send me immediately down to Florida, where there's going to be a 2 or 3 week session of grasping the issues and the problems in Southern Africa. And then they're going to send me to Botswana, which is just above South Africa. So I think you can understand, here I am waiting months on end, and nothing's happening. And then when it does happen, I got to move, very quickly and make a decision to go overseas. So I ended up making a decision that I would stay at home, nurture this relationship. However, I still wanted to do something worthwhile, and I figured if I couldn't go to the third world, which is what these developing countries were called back in the day, such as Botswana and Angola and some of these other African countries, maybe I would go to the third world in America, which is, I rationalized our prison system. So I start working in the Philadelphia prison system.
Can I ask you one
1971.
question that just hit me? I mean,
Yes, sir.
At Villanova, how were you received there?
Villanova was fine.
No anti-Semitism?
No, there wasn't anything like that. It was, the anti-Semitism was in the 50s, which I think was probably typical of a lot of Catholic neighborhoods where the kids were taught or encouraged to believe or gradually adopted a notion that Jews were the cause of all these many problems and the death of Jesus Christ and whatever. And when I was beat up at the age of 5, I had no idea who Jesus Christ was, much less that I had any role in his death. And that was pretty memorable. You know, I could get over the black and blue marks and the bloodletting, but the cerebellum, you know, takes longer to heal. And being the outcast, to use your phrase, stuck with me longer than those black and blue marks and
Right.
the broken teeth and nose and ribs and whatever.
So now we're at
Villanova was fine.
Okay.
Certainly conservative academically, much more conservative than Penn State. It was dramatically different in the sense, and I could feel it right away in the classroom, when you go to a university that has a secular open tradition, students are encouraged to raise their hand, ask questions, have an exchange. That was not the way in this, you know, Catholic institution. The Augustinians and maybe others as well, you sit there, you take notes, and you don't bother the professor. You don't question him. You just, you know, take down what he says. And I developed a reputation as a radical, not because I was leading any radical political campaigns, but I would ask questions once in a while, because I didn't come out of Doherty or Father Judge or Bishop Newman, you know, where you just sit there. I'm coming from a tradition in public schools and education where the interchange is part of the learning process. So by asking a lot of questions, you could develop a reputation. But Villanova was fine.
Okay.
So I start working, just as I graduate Villanova, I start working in the Philadelphia prison system. Holmesburg, Philadelphia Detention Center, House of Correction. They're the 3 prisons.
You were working on a literacy program, correct?
I ran the educational program.
That's what you were hired to do.
Yeah. I ran a literacy program. In the 70s, there is a movement in different parts of the country to try and be a little bit more progressive in these total institutions, which prisons are, and try to encourage some programming. The history of prisons, which Philadelphia is very long associated with, is lock them up and throw away the key. But there is a movement in the late 60s, early 70s to bring in counselors and advisors and teachers and what have you, to see if we can do anything with those people that we lock up. In many cases, it was just window dressing. It's just for show, or to show the federal government you're trying to do something. But in many others, there's a deep and concerted interest to try and do something that will give these folks who are locked up a better chance once they're released, because 95% of the folks we put in prison come back out again. And so...
And they come back out worse.
In many cases they do, but in some
system.
cases folks do learn, hell, I'm never doing that again because that prison scared the hell out of me. So, I mean, you find examples of everything. You know, some of them look at it just the cost of doing business, no big deal. Others are scared shitless, and they're never going to commit a crime again.
So what was your experience like when you first entered into... Was your first place Holmesburg, or was it somewhere
It
else?
was... I went through all 3 prisons, and they each held approximately 1,000 people. The system held, I guess, about 3,400. So Holmesburg may have had 1,200 when the House of Correction may have held 900, detention center may have held 1,100, but basically the same characters. It's overwhelmingly minority, 75% black, 10-15% Puerto Rican, 5-10% white. There's a lot of yelling, shouting, screaming. Folks are angry, folks are performative. They're trying to flex their muscles, their vocal cords. Others are scared shit and they want out. It's wild, it's raucous. It's not like you see on TV where it's fairly quiet and everybody's in their own cell. In a jail, which is what the Philadelphia system was, tremendous amount of movement. So you could be going through a corridor and get in a little space between a couple cell blocks where you may be in a holding area with 13 or 20 guys who were all black, all scarred, all angry, cursing you the hell out, and you're the only one in there. I mean, you know, they could have you for lunch. So those are things that can be very unnerving, particularly if you're not familiar with it and you haven't experienced it and you're not sure you can handle yourself. And the inmates would get a kick out of this. This is their entertainment, you know, to try and get over on somebody or what have you.
So you have to work with all of them. It's not an elected thing where they come to you and say.
Well, they do.
Okay.
They were not forced or encouraged to go to class. It was up to the inmate to basically volunteer or express interest in a program. So you had anti-drug programs, you had educational programs. Most of the inmates, basically, though, they're thinking of the chow hall for their 3 squares a day and the gym, yard out, things like that. But it was a fairly tough, abrasive, raucous atmosphere. A couple things that struck me the first day that I've written about, which you could not be blind to, is the power, the awesome influence at that time of the black Muslims. Mm-hmm. The black Muslims were a kick-ass, vicious gang. You could call them, they would like to be thought of as a religion, and fearsome, violent gang. And in fact, you couldn't rise through the system and become a captain unless you have a body, unless you were a murderer. And the whole hierarchy in the Lost Foundation, as they were known, is your criminal activity and who you know and how tough you were and how ruthless you were. And you could argue that they were the counterpart of the custodial staff. So they would march through the cell blocks in single file or 2 to row, and they would only take guidance from their own leaders, their own captains, so that if a guard told them to stop, they may very well move on until one of their own leaders told them to stop. And it was shocking to see that sort of power and influence. But that's how strong they were in numbers and organization. They really were a countervailing force to the organized custodial staff.
It's how Malcolm X got introduced in jail,
Absolutely.
right?
That's where
obviously
a great
in the
many,
50s and 60s.
That's right. A great many of them learn the Muslim philosophy and attitude and religion by being taken up in these movements in the prison system. And it was frightening because you could see that if they were directed to take somebody out, to shank someone, kill them, they would do it. And I can't tell you how many young black inmates came to me over the years requesting help, guidance, because they were Catholic or they were Protestant or they were this or no religion at all, but pressure was being on them to join Elijah Muhammad and to follow the ways of the Muslim nation.
And they came to you, they felt their life was in danger.
And they couldn't get any help from the guards. And there really wasn't much you could do for them because the entire prison was this way. So folks didn't really know or care what was going on. You know, the prison system historically tend to be the bottom of the social economic barrel.
Right.
And most folks think on the outside, if you're in prison, you're no good. Why should we care about you? Why should we try to develop anything, this, that, or the other? So,
and every country has a different outlook on
well,
rehabilitation.
Yeah, you could say that, but ours has been pretty bad. I mean, here we have a country now that inmate prisoners are 25% of the population.
We have the highest rate of incarceration at
Yeah, I mean, we are loaded with prisons.
That book, there was a book that became a movie, and the guy was, the two guys were in it. Tom Hanks was following him all over the world, and he was like impersonated.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When you read a book, people don't, I mean, book readers realize it,
Yeah.
but it turns into a movie. They usually take one part of the book, and it was great. The movie was fun. The book was great because what I got from the book, mostly, more of it,
I think
was
the guy's name was
incarceration.
Abagnale.
Yes.
Abagnale was
and his
the- yeah.
incarceration in the United States, in France,
Right.
in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
And how different
But
they
it was
were.
mostly how he took the persona of other people,
Yeah.
and the FBI chased him.
Yeah.
They are far more important books that deal with life on the inside and what goes on in prisons.
Well, I'll tell you, when we get to your books, you write well about it too. But anyway, how long were you in the prison system?
I was in the Philly prisons the entire 70s, from 71 to 80. And
What
then
happened to the girl?
we get married,
brought her up,
and
okay.
she's a professor.
Okay.
Now, a longtime professor
Still
at
married?
Penn State. No, that
Okay.
ended about the same time I left the prison system in 80.
10 years.
So that
Any kids?
No kids.
Okay.
That relationship basically runs through the course as the work in the prison system did. I stayed involved with prisons in various capacities, and I guess you could argue it's still a big part of my life since I do a lot of lecturing. That first book I wrote based on what I saw that first day. It wasn't
Well, we'll get to
just
that, right?
it wasn't just the black Muslims that I saw, but almost every other inmate was strapped and wrapped with adhesive tape and bandages. And it shook me because I couldn't believe the prison was that violent. It looked like they had just had a total gang war or a major fight out in the exercise yard. And it was not until the next day when I asked the guard on A Block, what's the story with all of these guys with all of these wounds? You know, is this place that unsafe? And John Reeves, the guard at the time, told me, or after laughing, he says, no, that's the perfume experiments for the University of Pennsylvania.
And that, you sit on that for 25, 30 years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That stays with you that long.
I couldn't believe that was the case because the juxtaposition of refined perfumes like Arpège by Lanvin and what have you on these inmates who are scarred and yelling and screaming and what have you, it made no sense to me, especially throw in the University of Pennsylvania. What the hell are they doing testing perfume on prisoners? I mean, everything about it sounded ridiculous, and I couldn't quite digest it, and I kept on asking questions of the guard, and he gradually got upset with me, and he said, look, Mr. Hornblum, you won't do it, I won't do it, but these inmates are crazy, and they're desperate for money, and this is the only way you can make a buck in the jail. So they do it, but most of us think they're nuts. And I just kept on quizzing him, and he said, look, you keep on asking questions, they're going to escort you out of here.
And
You're
lose your
new
job.
in here, not the experiments. They've been going on for 20 years. And so for the next few years, I watched the prison medical operation, and it was heavily medicalized because it wasn't just the Penn experiments, but there was a big operation, an additional operation, where the medical community was coming in on a daily basis, taking blood from inmates.
Jeez.
Inmates were selling their blood. And the prisoners were desperate for money, whether it's to send money to a wife, a girlfriend.
But you're not talking about big bucks.
it's, as they said, chump change.
Yeah.
But when you have nothing coming in,
Yeah.
if you've got a relative sending you money, you don't need to do it. But if you don't have any money, and maybe you want potato chips, maybe you want ice cream, maybe you want to buy some deodorant, the only way you can do it is if you push a broom on a cell block. But that's going to get you 25 cents a day, and there aren't many of those jobs. But they were constantly looking for test subjects. Dr. Kligman's operation at the University of Pennsylvania was arguably an incredible industrial operation, and it just had a life of its own. Combine that with the men who were selling blood, and you could see that these elite free world institutions in the medical arena were thriving and making big bucks off of these inmates who were locked up and overwhelmingly unschooled and black. And so you have these doctors in the jail in their white lab coats with MD and PhD after their names. And then they're constantly working with black inmates.
Not being asked any questions. What are you doing to them?
Yeah.
Right.
So that I asked a lot of questions to the inmates. What are you testing? What are the reactions? Inmates would come up to me showing me scars and wounds and telling me stories, particularly about the Army experiments, which had their own reputation in there because the military came in to do experiments on the inmates. So it was a very, very much a bizarre operation, which I, having a very skeptical mind in general, thinking, what the hell is really going on here? I mean, this is really a system that can abuse and take advantage of people. I never got to the bottom of it because people were afraid to talk, encouraged me not to ask questions. And jumping ahead years and actually decades, it wasn't until much later that I still thought there was a story there to be told, and I jumped into it. But for the time I was there in the 70s, it was just a very, very big, problematic puzzle that no one seemed to have a handle on, and you were discouraged from asking questions.
Did you ever feel like your life was in danger?
There were a few incidents that were unnerving, but I have to...
Stressful job, it sounds like.
Yeah. I met a number of guards who had major surgery and portions of their stomachs have been removed because of ulcers and fear and concern and what have you.
Were you going that way?
No, I was not affected that way. And it got to the point, as you find with a lot of prison workers, that if you can overcome those initial fears, that you learn to adapt and you pick up signals and learn about the system to the point that I, like a number of others, felt more secure in the prison than I do on the street. Mm-hmm. You learn the culture, you learn the behavior, and you can pick up signs and signals that something is going on that shouldn't. You learn, I mean, I could walk in the jail on any particular day and know something was up just based on the lack of yelling and screaming or a great amount of it. And you caught the signals. Whereas if you're on the street, you could be walking in a neighborhood or down a street and be more wary and concerned about that than you would on a cell block where, people would be scared to death, but you've learned that culture and understand who is to be feared, who you can trust, things like that. So there were many inmates who committed some very violent offenses who I developed a relationship with that I felt I could trust. There were others where I couldn't turn my back on. Whereas on the street, you don't know what the hell you're going to run into. You could think you're walking into, a nice section of Delancey Street downtown and find somebody who's trying to stick you up or whatever. It's,
Do you think your upbringing helped you?
Yes, a little bit. I think if I had been raised, let's say, on the main line of Villanova and had never spent time with the African American community and violence and people being beat up and stabbed and shot, I probably never would have even thought of a prison. Or if I did, I would have ended up like some others who went in there, they were introduced to the place, and that one day was the end of it. You know, I was told that the person who came in before me to be the literacy director had been given a tour and never came back after the first day, you know, because it scared the hell out of him. That wasn't for him. Whereas, you know, to me, it was a challenge that I had to overcome.
What's your most positive experience?
I can't.
Is that depressing?
It certainly could be very depressing, very challenging. But if you help somebody get their GED, if you helped a kid who could not read at all, and then you got him into reading at a very basic level, and you saw the advancement, and he saw the advancement, and he took pride in it, and he was going to continue to work on it, you know, that was success. That was like in the athletic world of, let's say, scoring a touchdown. You know, you've turned somebody on to learning, and maybe he had a terrible history in his elementary school or dropped out in junior high school, and now when he's 25 and a criminal or about to be tried on a crime, he's in prison for months, and you've brought him to class, and all of a sudden he's learning words, reading sentences, you know, waiting for the next book to be handed for him. You know, that's a positive that both the student and the teacher can take away with them.
Ever have an experience later in life where somebody came up to you on the street?
Oh, all the time.
Okay.
I ran into many former inmates who came up to me and thanked me, knew me, others that I had met in other prisons because I got into the subject matter heavily, was on the board of trustees of the prison society, and then was in the sheriff's office and continued to do a lot of prison reform work, became very well known because of my first book dealing with the history of prison experiments and things like that. So I developed a reputation, and they remembered me, and I remembered them. And so, yeah, occasionally, just like I could be out with friends, and the waiter, a young waitress or waiter will come up to me and said, "You were my teacher at Temple," or this, that, or the other. And it could be an inmate, you know, I remember you from detention center or Holmesburg. So yeah, those people come up, and I may, nice, you know, recognize them as well.
All right, so you're done. You're leaving the prison system. Unfortunately, at the same time, your marriage is
right.
falling. What's next?
What's next?
You get a master's at Temple too.
I got my master's. So I had a master's from Villanova, a master's from Temple.
What's the master's in Temple?
Public administration. And I continued to take courses and did all my coursework for a PhD in political science. And that is when I'm getting more active politically in the late 70s, to the point that I had sort of developed a name for myself in Philadelphia as a political operative of some ability. And I was pegged by the Americans for Democratic Action, ADA, to be their executive director. And back in the 70s, early 80s, ADA still had a formidable reputation in the political arena. They were the strongest, best known liberal progressive organization in the area. So I became the executive director of the Philadelphia Eastern Pennsylvania group. It was a big, formidable board of prominent Philadelphians with progressive tastes and inclinations. I ran a lot of political campaigns, political in the sense of both electoral and issue, did a lot of issue work, starting writing op-ed pieces in newspapers, positions on issues, articles in magazines, pushing different issues, still active with the prison society, doing prison reform work. My visibility and name is being more recognized in the political arena.
Who are you working with back then?
The big campaign back when I'm getting active is fighting Frank Rizzo. He was the arch enemy, as it were.
Well, he was a Democrat, but then he became a Republican.
Well, he was a Democrat, and we were Democrats mostly. But it was his style of politics, his thoughts, his heavy-handedness, perceived as racist and what have you, that we fought his effort to change the city charter so that he could get a third term. There's a lot of politics, heavy, gripping politics back then in Philadelphia. And we were successful in fighting his effort to overturn it. He becomes a Republican. As you said, he wants to get back into office. And there's a lot of issues taking place, fights on environmental issues and reproductive rights and labor issues and things that I'm working on. And that goes, so I'm the head of the largest liberal organization in the region in the early 80s. And then the mid-late 80s, I go on to work as an organizer for a group for the unemployed, do a lot of grassroots work for labor unions and folks striving to stay above water economically. And then towards the end of the 80s, the Crime Commission comes in there. The State Crime Commission is designed to investigate organized crime and public corruption. I'm appointed, to tell you the truth, I have a hard time now. I was appointed by mayors, governors, and speakers of the House to different commissions and organizations, and I have a hard time recalling exactly who appointed me to what. I can recall the groups, but the Crime Commission is investigating organized crime throughout the state and public corruption. And I'm also now at that point the chief of staff of the Philadelphia Sheriff's Office, and still involved with prison work. And so there's an overlapping there, but a lot of it has to do with the criminal justice system.
What does the sheriff do? I mean, we all know the sheriff from Wyatt Earp days, but what does what does these sheriffs do that we hear about?
Yeah, it depends.
Okay.
And when I say depends, I'm not hiding from the question, but it does depend geographically. Of course, there's a long history of sheriffs in the United States. They all emanate from overseas. In England, the Sheriff of Nottingham and what have you.
But what's the Philly sheriff that you're...
In Philadelphia, and mostly in the old East Coast, Northeast, the sheriff basically runs the courthouse security, moves prisoners, and serves legal papers.
Okay.
Whereas as you move further west, particularly west of the Mississippi, they have a greater role, as we know it, policing on the street. They do more work on the street,
Right.
arresting people and keeping the peace in the community.
What's the chief of staff do?
The chief of staff basically
For the
runs
sheriff.
the office,
Okay.
handles everything from dealing with politicians and media people who have questions to issues in the office dealing with legal papers that were or were not served, moving prisoners from the prisons in Northeast Philadelphia to the courthouse in Center City, which is a very serious, important issue. We had a problem in Philly. Some other communities may have it too, but I think it was accentuated in Philly because we set up our prisons in Northeast Philadelphia along the Delaware River, which is a good 10 miles from Center City. So you've got to put inmates on buses and then get them down to City Hall, Broad Market Street, and then in City Hall, most people didn't even realize that there was a prison in City Hall. The seventh floor of City Hall held different cell rooms. Some of them were very antiquated and dangerous, where we could pack 300 people into a cell room.
All waiting to be in court that whole day.
That was always an explosive situation. And then as the different judges and cases are called in different courtrooms, it's our deputies that escort those on trial into the courtroom and make sure nothing goes wrong in those courtrooms.
Because one can imagine, a kid picked up for marijuana that's not even illegal anymore. And you have a guy who might have killed 10 people all in the same...
That's exactly right. It could be very minor, where somebody is being tried as a car thief to somebody who's a serial murderer. And you can't always accurately predict who's going to be safe and who's going to be a danger, because it could jump off at any time.
Still on the Crime Commission at the same time?
Yeah, there was a lot of overlap there. So I was running back and forth to Harrisburg for meetings in Philadelphia, going to different prisons, what have you. And it's also during that period in the late 80s when I'm running across a lot of inmates in the cell room or in the courtroom or on the prison buses. I'm recognizing guys I knew from a couple decades earlier. They're still in the system. They could have been locked up and
Going
they're
in
coming
and out.
in and out, coming back and forth. And I recognize them. They recognize me. And I still can't get out of my mind what I had witnessed with those prison experiments.
Well,
And
let's talk about that.
I always thought there would be someone, a journalist, a reporter, a medical ethicist, a historian, who would
catches on.
investigate and do the hard yards that it would take.
But no one ever came. No one ever did that.
No one ever did it.
It's now early 90s, so
Right.
70, 81. You were
So a couple
22 years
decades.
into a career.
Right, yeah.
Right?
A lot of years have gone by, and no one had tackled what I had witnessed in the prison scene.
I think you're almost 50 before you write your first book, correct? And you've written,
Probably,
what, 7?
Yeah.
Seven?
I never had a great desire to read, much less write books.
Okay.
I told you.
So that
I
was
came-
that's my question. Are you drawn to this because of this desire your whole life to be an author? Or are you
No.
drawn to it from the topic?
The topic. What I witnessed, I felt was ripe for abuse, if not disaster. And I always felt, especially when you added the stories that I heard about the Army experiments and the other allegations that I was hearing from inmates and the sores and scars that I saw on inmates and the other things that I had heard from investigations that were taking place on related situations in Washington and hearings and investigations, that something nefarious probably took place right before our eyes in the Philly prison system. And nobody had bothered to investigate or look into it. And it just bothered me endlessly that it was still sitting out there after all these years. And I felt if I didn't do it, nobody would ever do it.
So you have this career and you just quit. This
Well,
is the fascinating part for me.
it wasn't that quick. What I'm doing initially is pulling some of these inmates aside. And after I ask them how they're doing and why they're locked up again and all of this, superficial chit chat, I get to the issue of the experiments. Were you ever on the experiments? Or I could see on their arms remnants from it. And they would tell me what they knew, but they didn't know much. The little that I learned only whet my appetite to learn more. And they would tell me of other inmates that I could turn to who know more about the story or have better stories to tell, who were used in the Army experiments or went through this or went through that. So I started to track these people down to the point that on my off hours or at night or weekends, I'm tracking down former criminals or current criminals. Some are locked up at Graterford, some are at other prisons, some are on the street. I'm starting to get their stories. And what is interesting to me is that they're willing to talk, they're willing to take off their shirts, show me the scars, the remnants, the recollections. And in addition to that, I'm starting to educate myself on the history of human experimentation, which has a very, very interesting history, which I never knew, but it is all not only enlightening, it really grabs me that something happened in Philly, at that time the third largest city in the nation, that has escaped the newspapers and the history books. And I think something very untoward has happened that I may be able to contribute to this public knowledge and dialogue on.
So then you quit.
No, I start doing a big
Let's get
search.
to the first book.
You want me out of that office, don't you? So what I
I want to
start
start hearing
doing,
about acres of skin.
what I start doing is collecting a lot of documents,
Okay.
spending time going to the University of Pennsylvania's medical library and looking up articles on medical experimentation, particularly experiments orchestrated by Dr. Albert Kligman. He is the notorious dermatologist at the University of Pennsylvania who directed the long-running prison experiments in Philadelphia. He had an international reputation, very formidable character. A lot of people were afraid of him, heard a lot of interesting stories, and as I'm on a Friday night, 10 o'clock at night, when people are partying or whatever, I got my ass down at the med library going through medical journals because you couldn't look anything up. The internet wasn't operating then where you could find articles.
Right.
You had to do it page by page in these very thick binders,
You have to know what you're looking
I'm
for.
in the bowels of the library going through these big bound journals, the American Journal Association, the American Dermatological, this, that, and the other. And I'm finding incredible stories about human experiments on different populations, almost all the populations being what we would call vulnerable populations.
And these aren't supposed to be happening anymore since when Nuremberg is supposed to stop this.
That's right. You could argue that those trials of the Nazi doctors and our American jurists handing down the Nuremberg laws would the code, the Nuremberg Code, would have precluded what went on at Bergen-Belsen and Ravensbrück and Dachau and what have you. But in fact, as I discovered, there was a shitload of experimentation that was continuing, ongoing, and it was
not by these like fly-by-nights. You're talking about University of Pennsylvania.
Major institutions were doing experiments not only on prisoners but children. What they called back in the day, the feeble-minded and morons.
And you write about that in book 3 or 4.
It's astounding to me. And when I told this one doctor, A. Bernard Ackerman, who worked in the Philly prisons, who worked under Kligman, and years later became a prominent physician in his own right, he told me that's going to be your next book, the one on children. It wasn't the next book, it was further down the line, but it still stuck with me that this was another unknown part of the American medical landscape, using children as guinea pigs.
You've gone through all this. You're 20 years into this career. You're not a journalist, really.
Right.
You didn't go to school for writing.
Right.
And then you decide to write a book. How do you have the confidence to write a book?
Well, I don't.
And how do you put everything? It seems like you put a lot on the line to do this.
Yeah, I put an awful lot on the line.
And the first book's called Acres of Skin.
Right. It has nothing to do with pornography.
Right.
When I give lectures, a lot of students get excited. They think I'm going to give an X-rated lecture. But the Acres of Skin is just as it says. That is a phrase. I didn't create it. It's a phrase that was often used by Dr. Kligman when he was telling people about his operation in the Philly prison systems. He would tell young medical students looking to specialize in dermatology, come to Penn, we have Acres of Skin. The Acres of Skin was the inmates on the cell block.
So it comes from him.
That's where it comes from. When I read that phrase in a Philly newspaper, I knew right away that was the title of my book. And as I discovered, there was enough material there to write a book on. In fact, I could have written 2 or 3. I came across so many experiments, interviewed so many men, interviewed so many doctors, and what was so clear early on, the inmates are willing to talk, but don't really have any information.
They don't know what they're being
They don't know what was being injected into them. They don't know what they were swallowing.
Agent Orange was?
The Agent Orange was dioxin.
Okay.
Kligman in 1963-64 is sought out by Dow Chemical Company. They have a problem in one of their factories. They're making a herbicide, and all of a sudden they've got a work stoppage because many of the men in the factory making the herbicide are coming down with chloracne. These are very distinguishable, painful blackheads and pimples.
And they
on
stopped
the body.
working, right?
And they had a union strike. The union told the men, get out, something's wrong in that building, and they tell management, we're not going back to work until you figure out what the problem is and correct it. Management at Dow is not stupid. They go to their physicians and they say, look, we can't get our product to the market. We've got a work stoppage. You've got to figure this out. Now, the Dow scientists up there in Midland, Michigan are not stupid. They already have an idea what the problem could be. It's a byproduct, this very white, potent powder that we know today is dioxin. And they know that it is very abrasive, toxic, and probably carcinogenic. They do experiments on the ears of rabbits, applying small amounts of the dioxin on these rabbits, and they get the eureka moment. The ears come back with chloracne. When they inform management of this, management says, fine, but we need the real deal. What's the real deal? They need humans. They want the human reaction to dioxin. So back in the day, in the 60s, where do you go test nasty shit on people? You go to Philly. They weren't coming to Philly because we had great pizza, because we had excellent soft pretzels, because we had Norm Van Brocklin throwing passes to Tommy McDonald. They're coming here because people in the world of medical experimentation know about Penn, Dr. Kligman, and the Philly prisons. Because
and everyone turns a blind eye.
Kligman was so prolific to doing experiments. If you read the accounts in the medical journals, you're always seeing Kligman, the Ivy League University, Penn, and the prisoners as test subjects.
You understand what Penn's getting out of it. You understand what the doctor's giving out. What's the prison getting out of it? They just pouring money into
the prison inmates.
Who's getting paid off? People are getting paid off.
The inmates are getting $1 or $2 a
But
day.
forget about the inmates. Why is the prison letting this
prison
happen?
system is doing it because, to some extent, they think it may be a public service, advancing medicine and helping a formidable city institution, Penn. And maybe there were some monies that Kligman was kicking back. And he may have been doing that either to the city or to the warden of the institution. I wasn't able to nail that down as finitely as I would have liked, but there's no doubt that there was a monetary transaction there to some extent, and it goes on for a quarter century. It's really remarkable how long this industrial-sized operation lasted. We're talking about thousands of Philadelphians who were used as test subjects.
And that's your first book, Acres of Skin. If somebody
Acres of
wanted to
Skin.
get
I
it,
started
that's a
on it
great
in
book.
1993, and it finally comes out in 98. And
You're still, that's the
achieved-
most famous book for you.
Probably, certainly in the academic arena.
Okay.
I have other books that other groups may be more partial to, such as the Irish Mob book, or some in sports like the Bill Tilden book, whatever. But the academic community, that Holmesburg story of the experiments, in some cases rivals, competes with the Tuskegee syphilis study, which is arguably the best known case of
That's a syphilis.
unethical medical experimentation, where
Guys with
several
syphilis.
hundred black sharecroppers were used as guinea pigs for 40 years in Alabama.
Never cured them, right?
This
They
is
never
not,
cured them.
They weren't even interested in curing them. They were just looking at the
Long range effects.
right of the disease. So that story comes out in '98. It's featured on Good Morning America, the Evening News with Dan Rather. It
They do a
makes every
documentary about
newspaper. Yeah, and now the BBC is going to come out in the spring with a 5-part series on the book.
Wow.
So there's still a lot going
Still
on.
around. That's 20 years.
It's been optioned for a movie.
25
Well,
years ago.
when it comes out.
No, I mean, it's coming out now, but the book is 25 years old.
Yeah, it's over 25.
Yeah. What's your second book? City Hall?
No, you're going to have to tell me. Cause
I thought
can't,
Philadelphia City Hall, 2003. That's my the book on City Hall in the 30
may be right.
years.
I haven't kept track.
And
When
then
was
Confessions of
Okay.
a Second Story Man. That's 2006.
Okay.
That's the one I get when you ask me. That's the one I start looking for.
Because your family was into second story work.
Supposedly, I'm.
Okay.
You know, supposedly.
You're so modest.
Supposedly,
you don't
yeah,
want to take
that's
credit.
what I want to be known for. Anyway, I read the book years ago, loved it.
Any of your
And that's
relatives
why-
in there?
I don't have no idea. I'm taking the fifth on that.
Okay.
Is that what Trump says? I'm taking the fifth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew a lot of.
Confessions of a. Anyway, how do you get to that book?
Well, because I've spent so many years in various facets of the criminal justice system, from teaching prisoners to working in prisons, on the crime commission and the commission for crime and delinquency and this, that, and the other, I'm sort of floating, submerged in the criminal justice system. I know a shitload of cops and robbers. And one of the stories that I'm hearing periodically and meeting some of these characters is Philly's old K&A gang. They're, in some cases, revered in the river wards. I mean, it's a legendary crew of guys. And I know some of them, and I go to look for a book to learn more about it, and there's nothing there. No one ever wrote a book on it. There's a few articles. And I'm thinking, wow, this could be another story like Acres of Skin, where something unique and grand in proportion has taken place, but nobody, either at the newspapers or at Temple or Penn, has bothered to write about it. So I start tracking people down, investigating as I did Acres of Skin. I'm now no longer a novice.
I'm starting to see a pattern, Alan.
That's right.
You have an interest. You can't find out about it. Screw it. You're going to fill that interest for yourself.
That's right. I should make a comment here that people laugh at, but I think it's true. Philly is a very parochial town, and we tend to be fixated on things, and other things that may have equal significance are jettisoned, forgotten about. And there are a lot of stories about people, incidents, groups, events that fall through the cracks. And that may be my entree into these, because I think they merit some sort of investigation and publication. So I start tracking down members of the old K&A gang, the Irish mob. So I'm spending a shitload of time going into shot and beer joints in the river wards, running from...
When you say river wards, K&A?
Well, K&A's the middle of it,
Kensington
but it
and
goes as far
Somerset?
north as Frankfurt and Holmesburg, all the way down to Center City.
You're just in these bars talking to people.
I go into
How are you being
bars.
received?
In some cases, I'm being welcomed. In some cases, I'm being shunned. In some cases, I'm being threatened. In some cases, I'm carrying a gun. In some cases, I'm just carrying a pen and a piece of paper. It depends where I'm going, who I expect to meet, who I could meet.
So it's 2004 or 5. If I remember, most of the books around about the 60s, the gang in the 60s, right? Or early 70s.
Yeah.
And so what's their apprehension if you're going to write about something that's
They don't want to
40
be
years?
associated with it. Some of these guys, in fact, as I write in the book, which is certainly the last chapter of the book, is many of these formidable burglars, and it became a cottage industry in the 50s and 60s. By the 70s, they move into drugs. They are now up in your age bracket, and they're eating well, but they're not working out. And therefore, their waistlines are bigger than their IQs. They can no longer carry a bag of tools. They can no longer jump fences. They can no longer, or want to be out in the wilds, breaking into a house and running away with jewelry or artwork or whatever. They can make 10 times the money with 1/10 the effort selling meth. So many of the K&A guys transfer from second story work to drug dealing. And that is an arrangement that can make them much more money but they could also end up doing 3-4 times the amount of time. If they get caught, they could also get killed.
Can you explain to people who don't know what's second story man?
A second story man is an old 19th, early 20th century term that refers to burglars, where they couldn't get in on the first floor because the doors were locked, but there could be a window or door unlocked on the second floor. So burglars tended to be very adroit, very crafty, physical, where they could climb and run and get into places very quick, go through the house, take what's of value, and then get the hell out.
Right.
So second
Three or
story-
four people.
Well,
sometimes
it
women.
depended. It depended. It could be 3 or 4, where there would be a designated driver, and then there would be somebody who would break in the front door or the back door, and then that person would stand by the front door looking to see if the homeowner or cops were coming around, and the other 2 men would go through the house. And they would try to find anything of value as quickly as they could and get out. Then they would go to the next house. Then they would go to another house.
They never took a gun, right? Tell us why.
That term was called production work. Okay. And they turned it into a cottage industry. A lot of them made very good money. And if they got caught, they generally had enough money to hire good lawyers who could either get them out on bail or do a little amount of time. There were other characteristics of the K&A gang where they learned not to carry weapons on the job. They knew that a weapon could only get them in deeper trouble and a longer prison sentence, because you could end up scaring yourself and the homeowner and shooting them by intent or accident, and all of a sudden something that maybe only 18 months could be 18 years. So the best of the K&A gang members did not carry a weapon. If they found a weapon in the house, they would disarm it, hide it, so if the owner came back he couldn't find it. And in some cases they wore suits, ties, and jackets so that they wouldn't be mistaken for some, thug coming out of Kensington who's looking to make a score, but maybe a businessman who got lost, or if the cops saw them on the street, they wouldn't look that suspicious.
I thought it was neat when I was reading about how they would go away for weekends drive down to South Carolina or North Carolina or Vegas, or take planes places out the West Coast.
They became very sophisticated. The group gets started in the early 50s, as best I could tell, led by a criminal named Willie Sears, who developed what he called production work, trained a lot of the guys to work with him, and then eventually they would form their own crews. And they would initially they would follow the businessmen, many of them Jewish, who had businesses on Kensington Avenue, Frankfurt Avenue. Let's say the guy had a hardware
Store to
store.
stars.
They could have a hardware store, a shoe store, a restaurant. They'd follow the owners back to where they lived in Northeast Philly or outside the city. Could be Abington, could be Rydal, could be North Penn, it could be in Jersey. And they'd find where the owners lived and then determine when the owner would not be there, break into the house, because they knew these people had money. So they would take whatever money they could find, whatever jewelry, whatever flatware, silverware they could find, anything that would make them money was good to go. And as they got better and more sophisticated, they'd go further out. They'd go up to Hazleton. They go to Wilkes-Barre. They go to Princeton. They go to the Oranges. They go further to North Jersey. They go into Long Island, up into Connecticut. They'd go down into Maryland.
I thought it was neat when they went into places. They said, "Oh, people hide the stuff the same way everywhere."
Yeah,
always in the bedroom. I remember a couple of times
right.
they were like,
"That's right."
Didn't have things, and then it's going to be here. It's going to be here, and then they would find it.
The second story men knew that people generally want to keep their valuables close to them, so they keep it in their bedroom. So they would go in the chest of drawers or armoire or what have you, and they'd go through it, and they'd come out with various things of value. And this worked very well for them, and they would hit 4 or 5 houses a night, upscale houses, well-to-do people, and they could make a big score. As I write in the book, they beat the hell out of North Carolina. Cary, North Carolina, was a up-and-coming town of prominent, well-off people, and they would go there for a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night and steal the shit out of everything. And for years, the cops, state police, couldn't figure out who the hell was doing it. There were no signs. It was a very, very professional operation. The cops down there who I interviewed and talked to said it was almost like a vacuum cleaner from the heavens came down and sucked everything of value out of the house. And it wasn't until they got a break and found some stuff down the shore in Jersey that they could trace back, and then got one of the guys and so forth and so on. But there were different communities that the K&A gang could designate as an upscale area that was fertile territory for their invasion.
How does Junior Krippelbaum get named in the title?
Krippelbauer. Junior Krippelbauer was not Irish. His mother was Irish, but not the father. He was actually from an upstate coal mining family. I think it was something very small community of Upper Burnsville. And the whole family had been working in mines. And Junior was wild enough, savvy enough to recognize that he didn't want to work in the mines. He didn't want to come home with black soot over his face. He didn't want to end up like relatives with black lung, but he did want to have the good life. He wanted money, he wanted cars, he wanted to travel with beautiful women. And periodically the family would come down to Philly. He goes into the service, and when he comes out, he doesn't want to go back into the mines. He starts hanging around family who have moved to Philadelphia. He starts going to different bars, and he gets introduced to various criminal activities, and he's sticking up people, he's carrying a gun, but he also makes friends with men who are part of the K&A gang. And they tell him that, you're a fool because you're going to get caught or you're going to kill somebody. You should, get involved in burglary the way we do it. And he starts to do that. And so this Upper Burnsville German coal mining character who's 6'4", 230 pounds, tough guy, starts doing second story work, starts making friends and putting his own crew together. And he's very successful, very savvy, very aggressive, and tireless. He wants to work. And if he's ever told at a bar, I know of a house, or I just got a tip, this, that, and the other, he said, let's go. So there was no downtime with him, and he ends up traveling not just in the area, but all over the country. He's on the West Coast, he's down south in Texas, he's in Florida, he's up in Bar Harbor, Maine, goes all over and making scores left and right.
If anybody's interested, anybody from Kensington, anyone from the city, grab this book. It's pretty good. It was a fun read.
They're always asking me when the movie's going to be made.
Yeah.
And if you would devote some of the money you're making from these podcasts to producing the picture, I think we could go a long way. And you can start, naming Clooney or Pitt.
Maybe Bradley Cooper.
That's right.
Huh?
Exactly.
Mr. Germantown Academy.
He could be Mr.
I haven't been able to get him on the podcast yet, but, I've been busy.
Yeah, he could be Krippelbauer.
So your next book after that, we go back to Holmesburg, right?
We do.
I think we do. We go to Sentence to Science, and we go to Anthony, Mr. Anthony.
Yeah, Sentence to Science is, again, a book about the Holmesburg experiments.
But it's about one particular man now.
It's about Eddie Anthony, who's still alive, up in years.
I love the beginning of, talking about his life, how when he was a kid, hit me once, was like, he wasn't allowed to go to the white kids' houses from his mother, but the white kids were allowed to come to his house.
Yeah.
That was okay. And then, unfortunately, gets hooked on smack.
Right.
And ironically, he's going up to Harlem, because that's the best heroin at that time and the cheapest. And now Philadelphia has the best, and that's why all the kids are coming here from all over the
He
East
led
Coast.
a tough life, Eddie Anthony.
Yeah.
and he didn't do well in school. He drops out. He's starting to sell a little bit of marijuana on the street, but very small amounts. He's about 20 years old. He's picked up. And the irony, which I always point out in my lectures, is here we have this young, black,
Sensitive kid.
he hasn't done particularly well in school. They lock his ass up. They put him in Holmesburg. And
18 months for nothing.
He starts with the experiments.
Mm-hmm.
They start injecting him with different chemicals and putting him on different experiments. So he's arrested for being with marijuana, which may have been the most tame substance in comparison to what he's being given in prison.
Right. It's giving it worse in prison.
Right.
But what hit me reading the book, I'm sorry, was the first prison he was put in.
Moya Mensing.
Yes.
Moya
And he says about how he hated it and scared shitless of it.
Yeah.
But he does come out of that.
But he's picked
And he
up
goes
again,
right back.
and he ends up. And MoCA was in operation until about 1963.
You made me like this guy.
Well, he was a likable
Yeah.
guy.
You made me like this
And
guy.
I didn't know him when I wrote Acres of Skin. After Acres of Skin comes out,
I was going to ask, how did he get
it
this?
makes tremendous headlines around the country. It's in every newspaper in the country. It's written about overseas, a lot of TV, a lot of interviews. And the former inmates, start to gather as for the first time they're learning what they were exposed to, what
they have
they
groups
were
and
injected
stuff, right?
with. And so we start meeting at these Quaker meeting halls in North Philly. First there's a dozen, then there's 2 dozen, then there's 4 dozen, then there's over 100.
That means you're there?
I'm there at these meetings, and they're asking me questions, and they're getting the book, they're passing the book around, because there's great interest, because they were never told that they were being injected with radioactive isotopes. They were never told that they were having dioxin applied to them. One of the people who comes to the meetings who has some incredible stories to tell is Edward Anthony. And I start bringing him to my classes at Temple. And the students are very much impacted by what he has to say, because he's representative of the milieu of what went on. He's one of the prototypic cases, and I start bringing him with me when I speak at Brown University, or I speak at Princeton, or we go to Washington University of St. Louis, or medical retreats. I tell the doctors, the professors, look, you can have me, a George Clooney lookalike, give the story, but I can also, if you're willing to put up a little bit more money, bring one of the men themselves, so that you can hear right from the horse's mouth why they did it, how it impacted, how they feel about the medical community now. And in most cases, they see the value of that, because it makes for a much richer educational experience. For example, all of the Tuskegee syphilis subjects are dead, but you still do have a few of the Holmesburg Philly men alive. So I would bring Eddie with me, and he would tell a story, and I always got great feedback from professors and students. They would say, like after we gave a lecture at Penn State, a professor would tell me that a couple students came to the professor subsequent to the talk and said, of my 4 years here, this is the most impactful, lecture I've heard, which was rewarding for me, and I knew it was paying off. And a lot of the reason for that is having an actual test subject tell a story. So it was that, combined with the fact that a number of the Holmesburg men told me that Acres of Skin was a little bit too tough for them. There's too many long words, there's too many scientific terms, there's too many concepts, phrases in there that they can't quite digest. They wish I would have made it more digestible for them. So I tried to write a book that they would not have any difficulty with and could understand and relate to. So I write Sentence
More
to
like
Science.
a story.
Yeah.
Or this was more like a textbook.
Yeah, that's right. It's one person's story rather than a full investigation of the phenomena.
Sentence to Science, one black man's story of imprisonment in America. And that black man was Edward M. Anthony.
Right.
3 years later, you write about the invisible Harry Gold.
Right.
And Harry Gold is a Philadelphian who gives Russia the atomic bomb. Tell me about that. Because I could not get that. That's one book I did not read. I apologize.
One of my interests over the years was Soviet espionage. Soviet agents, Americans who became Soviet agents, and the work they did for the Soviet Union before the Second World War, during the Second World War, after the war. And I found it fascinating that there was this character in many of the books and many of the stories named Harry Gold. And once again, we have the situation where a very interesting, formidable historical figure is forgotten about and not given his due.
Why is he forgotten about?
I think the reason is he was not particularly prepossessing, as some people would say. And what I mean by that, he was about 5'7", 5'8", 165, 180 pounds. He was a little obsequious guy that you could pass on the street 20 times and never take notice of.
Obsequious meaning not noticeable.
That's right. He was just a little nothing. He wasn't Sean Connery and James Bond, but he was the literal James Bond. James Bond is the creation of somebody's mind. Harry Gold was the real deal.
And he's from Philly.
Harry Gold grows up in South Philly. He grows up just a couple blocks from the Oregon Diner. He grows up just above Oregon Avenue on a small street. His parents are from Europe. They're
from Russia, right?
They're from the Ukraine.
Okay.
And they're not particularly sophisticated, well educated. The father is a woodworker. The mother helps young kids preparing for their bar mitzvah. And they're surviving just about, as many immigrants were in the early years and decades of the 20th century.
How does Harry Gold have the atomic bomb secrets?
Harry Gold is a small, how should I put it? He wanted to be everybody's friend. He was just a nice, gentle, unassuming kid who wants to please people, and he is interested in learning. He'd like to be a jock, but he isn't. But he loves sports, follows them religiously, is a big reader, does very well in school. His mother is interested in education that's passed on to the kid. And he goes on to become a chemist and works at the Philadelphia Sugar Refinery in South Philadelphia. And he, through various connections, meets an agent for the Soviet Union. And what many people don't know is that the Soviets are not just interested in military weaponry, but they're interested in anything that can help advance Soviet society. So Harry becomes an industrial spy and starts turning over information and formulas about various processes at the refinery company to the Soviets.
At the sugar refinery.
That is correct. It has nothing to do with military weaponry.
Okay.
However, the Soviets start to recognize that people like Harry can be very valuable, particularly if we are able to place them in sophisticated places.
Now, the stuff he's giving away, is that illegal?
Of course it is.
Okay.
You know, he's stealing stuff from the company,
Okay.
But most people would not consider it a threat to society.
Right.
But he's turning over, proprietary, corporate information to a foreign country. And initially, it's, in Harry's mind, just so the struggling people of the Soviet Union can catch up to Western Europe and America. But little by little, they start to move him into places and have him become an emissary and the connective tissue to more serious things dealing with weaponry and military objectives. And eventually, he's put in a position, because he's a long-running, dedicated, hard-working spy, where he is given the assignment to deal with Klaus Fuchs. Klaus Fuchs is the German-British scientist who gets out of Germany, goes to England, gets his PhD, the war starts, comes to America, and because he's respected and connected to serious nuclear thinkers, that he's part of the team that initially is in Manhattan, the Manhattan Project, that goes to the Southwest in Santa Fe and starts to build the first atomic bomb.
How does Harry Gold from Philly
Harry Gold
in the
fits
sugar
in.
factory?
Harry Gold becomes the emissary. He becomes the spy who travels repeatedly to the Southwest or meets Klaus periodically in New York to get the documents that underscore and illuminate what the American scientific community is doing to build a bomb.
So he's doing that for the Russians.
He's doing it for the Soviets. He's doing it for the Soviets.
But the other guy, Fuchs,
Klaus
is
Fuchs.
in on it.
Klaus Fuchs is a
He's
spy.
not stealing it from the Fuchs.
Fuchs is giving it to him.
Right.
Fuchs,
That's the part I didn't understand.
what the
I'm like, how's he getting it, stealing it from Fuchs?
he was not vetted very well, Fuchs. He has significant people who document his theoretical ability, but are in the dark with regard to his political allegiance, which is to the communists. He's a communist. He came from a democratic German religious family, and with the rise of Hitler, Fuchs and others recognized the threat that the Nazis present to German society. And Fuchs is one of the few who's willing to go out on the street and fight the Nazis hand to hand. And he gets on their shit list and they rough him up, beat him up, and he cannot get the powers that be to recognize the threat that Hitler and the Nazis present. And as the Nazis get stronger and the communist and democratic forces get weaker, Fuchs has to leave the country because it's pretty clear that anybody who fights the Nazis is going to be exterminated. So he gets himself to France, and then from France to England as Hitler's rising in power.
And we're so excited about having somebody that can tell us the inside of the Nazis.
Well, it wasn't
Kind
so
of.
much what he knew about the
Okay.
Nazis. He develops.
I'm wondering why he wasn't vetted then.
Well,
I wonder why.
I think it's because he comes through the British educational system, highly recommended as a great scientific theorist with some very good ties to top-notch names. They stand up for him, and Fuchs gets himself to Canada as the war kicks off. And then he's recommended by the top theoreticians to go to Los Alamos and work on this new theoretical bomb. And he's very bright, he's very knowledgeable. There's a lot of scientists doing some groundbreaking work. But
So that movie that just came out a year or two ago.
there's
he's
a number
part
of
of
them.
that.
There's a number of good films on it.
Right.
But Fuchs
He's part of
has
7 or 8 guys.
Fuchs has to get the documents about what they're working on to the Soviets.
And Harry's the way to go.
And Harry becomes the spy, the emissary, who travels back and forth, gets the documents.
Does he ever get caught?
Gold gets
Harry.
caught in about March of 1950, after the war. But he had spent 15 years as a very loyal Soviet spy. He never joined the Communist Party. He wasn't really into communist or Marxist philosophy. Initially, he just did it because he has this this desire to help the downtrodden, because that's where his parents came from. They came from a part of Russia, the Ukraine, and they were struggling. He knows there's a lot of other people there. And he's of a very good will. You know, if you were struggling and you needed $5 for a haircut or a new shirt or travel, Harry would give you his last $5. He was always willing to expend himself for people, and he was used. He was naive. He was a little bit of a putz, in the sense that people could direct him to things that he probably should have known better not to do. And he gets into this thing
He wants to
deeper
be
and
liked.
deeper and deeper. He wants to be liked. and he likes people, and he does things. There was no brake mechanism. There wasn't a part of his brain to tell him, this is wrong, you're going to get your ass in a
So what
ring.
happens to Harry Gold?
So Harry Gold is eventually caught in March. The FBI put pressure on him while he's working in Philadelphia at the old municipal hospital, PGH. He's working there in the heart unit as a chemist. And the FBI do some very, very good, at that time, groundbreaking work. It took them a long time to focus on communist agents. They were behind the ball initially, but then they come up to speed, and they finally think he's the one who's meeting with Klaus Fuchs. They put pressure on him for days, a week or so, meeting with him, asking him questions, watching him, observing him, filming him, and he finally breaks. He finally gives in. The Soviets knew he was eventually going to be targeted. They warned him to get his little ass out of Philadelphia and America, but Harry couldn't see leaving. And he really is the linchpin, because if you don't get Harry, you probably don't get the Rosenbergs, which is even a better known case of spies and the atomic bomb.
If you don't get Harry, you don't get the Rosenberg.
That's right.
How's that connection?
Harry gives up Ethel Rosenberg's brother.
Wow.
He's one of the people he met in Los Alamos to get papers that were given to Ethel's brother. The Soviets had a number of spies insinuated in the Los Alamos operation. They tried to make sure everything was pristine there, but it's very difficult to do, particularly with something like that was the first of its kind, and you have hundreds and then thousands of people working on it. And Harry gets caught up in that, and when he breaks, they throw him in the Holmesburg prison. He spends about a year in Holmesburg. He is tried himself, and he divulges everything. He gives up everything, and that becomes the head of the train that brings in so many others who then start flipping, like Ethel's brother and then other people and what have you. Fuchs never knew Harry's name.
Okay.
He knew he was dealing with somebody of some sophistication in Philadelphia who would come to meet him. But this is where the FBI did some good work in moving from Fuchs to Harry. Fuchs is arrested and put in Wormwood Scrubs prison in London. And they start interviewing him to find out who the link was. And as J. Edgar Hoover said, this was the biggest investigation in FBI history to track down that
It's another movie.
conduit. Should have been. But the problem goes back to what I said earlier. If that individual would have looked like Sean Connery, 6'3", 200 pounds, athletic looking, the movie would have been made years ago.
So we make him look like that way.
Well, then you're really...
I got who's playing you in your life story. Jeff Goldblum. He's tall, handsome, athletic.
Now you're talking. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
He looks good, and he talks.
Well, he's a little bit too
a good
old now,
talker.
Jeff.
Is
But he's getting up in years, but so am I. But the point is, Harry was this loyal Soviet operative, and he
Does
gets
he
a
get
30.
shot?
He
Or
gets a
does he go
30-year
30?
sentence,
30 years.
and he ends up doing 15 years in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, and he gets out in about 1966. And he works for a few years at a hospital that no longer exists in Philadelphia, up on the boulevard. He has heart problems, and he dies when he's about 62 years old. So I think it's
you
a
never
fact.
met him. I mean, when you
Never
wrote it,
met him,
yeah.
could never interview him. I interviewed people who knew him. I interviewed nurses who worked with him in the hospital, people who knew him. They liked him a lot because he was just a very sweet, endearing character who got caught up in something and could not say no. And it ended up ruining his life, his family's life, did a tremendous amount of damage. And that story probably should have been told for a good many different reasons because there's a lot to learn from it.
Maybe we'll still get to tell it.
But it's a very sad tale about this, innocuous, little guy who is well-intended but ends up doing a great deal of damage.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions,
Yeah.
right? Now, your next book, Against Their Will, takes you back to the experiments.
against their will.
More about the children now, right?
This book goes back to what Dr. Ackerman wanted me to do years earlier, a book about the history of using institutionalized children as guinea pigs for medical experiments. When I was doing the research on the prison experiments, I could not get over all of the studies I was finding in these medical journals that didn't use prisoners, but were using 4, 5, 6-year-old children, children in orphanages, children in institutions for the disabled, the mentally ill, what they called the retarded back then. And I just thought that was a story that needed to be told because people don't know of it. They think this crap only happened in Nazi Germany.
Right. People don't realize in our society that sometimes these kids weren't kept with their family, right?
Many, like I have pictures in the book of men who are now in their 80s who I tracked down, and they were in the Fernald School in Massachusetts, in Waltham, who came from dysfunctional families, many of them Irish Catholic, many of them alcoholic, where they would have 12.5 children. The parents were dysfunctional and kept on knocking out children. The children ran around wild, did not behave, were not fed, were not directed, were not given guidance, were not given love and affection. The state would eventually come across them, be pressed to do something with them, and they would take the children away from the parents who were dysfunctional, and they were put in orphanages or other institutions where the kids were labeled morons. And the Fernald School became famous or infamous because in the late 40s, early 50s, doctors, scientists from MIT and Harvard would go there and use these kids in experiments. And they would inject them with radioactive isotopes to be part of experimental raw material. And this was not divulged until many decades afterwards. I trekked up there, tracked down a number of these guys. Their photos are in the book, their stories are in the book. And it really is a gripping, chilling, ugly story of the best of us using the least of us. And what was so interesting to me is when I wrote the book on Acres of Skin, I got many invitations to appear on radio, TV, other interviews, and I expected the same thing to happen with the story about the children. But I didn't get as many invites. And when I would ask some of the producers why, they would tell me it's just too dark for our audience. It was bad enough using prisoners, black prisoners, but using 5-year-olds as guinea pigs?
People just didn't want to believe it.
Didn't want to believe it.
And therefore, they don't want to cover it.
And therefore, they don't know about it. I can't tell you the number of times I have done interviews, I've been on talk shows, people would call up and say, I had no idea of this, I just thought it happened in Nazi Germany.
Right.
But it happened here, and the best institutions and doctors were doing it.
And because
Here-
we don't want to know about it, kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't even want to say, but like kids getting touched by institutions that
Yeah.
do that, and people just don't want to believe it, so they just,
Yeah.
it's not happening.
There are some very, very famous, highly regarded doctors, like the doctor who came up with the elixir for polio, who first did his polio experiments on children from the D.T. Watson School for Handicapped Children and the Polk State School for the Feeble-Minded, as it was known, back in the late 40s and early 50s.
So we see it as throwaway people that nobody wants to deal with. We can do these experiments because it's for the good of everyone.
Exactly right. And it was done all over the country, not just as we see in Macon County, Alabama, with the Tuskegee sharecroppers, but as we did in Acres of Skin, the University of Pennsylvania, for 25 years, using the imprisoned. And before that, Kligman used to go down to South Jersey, in Vineland, in Woodbine. Those institutions there were called the New Jersey State School for the Feeble-Minded, one for girls and one for boys. Kligman used to go down there in the late 40s and do these experiments on kids where he would abrade the scalp of a 5-year-old little girl with various intellectual or physical, maladies or deformities.
Nobody's sticking up
abrade
for
their
her.
scalp and then apply ringworm to it, and then try to come up with some sort of elixir that would rectify the problem. Or he would take the fingernails off of these kids. This went on in the 1940s. When I went down to those institutions to check them out, I met some people there, and I still recall clearly going into a gymnasium type room at Woodbine, I believe, and I saw a parent there, and they asked me what I was doing, and I told them, and they said, "Oh, you're mistaken. That never happened here." They wanted to believe that what I was describing could not happen. And I said, I got to tell you, it did happen, because I've got the government documents showing that it did. So the point is that even people who in the 90s were involved, either as employees or as parents, had no conception what had gone on 25 years earlier. And that runs through the course of medical research in the mid-20th century. Doctors, scientists knew where to go to perform experiments. They went to facilities and institutions that held throwaway people that didn't count, so that you could do things and not have to worry about being hit with a lawsuit, being hit with a reporter in a newspaper asking embarrassing questions.
You must be a hoot at dinner parties, Alan.
Well, if I talk
These
about
fun
my
stories
tennis
I can
game,
tell. Right.
but no, there's
Talking about tennis,
Yes, sir.
your next big book,
My next big book is about
American Colossus.
another one of these cracks in the Philadelphia firmament,
Yeah.
where a staggeringly accomplished, brilliant athlete
From Germantown.
from Germantown, unknown today, regrettably, a great many of even the Philadelphia tennis players that I hit with do not know the name Bill Tilden, or if they do, they've heard the name but can't really associate him with anything.
That's me.
However, if
Heard
you
of Bill
go
Tilden.
back
I love
100
tennis.
years,
I love Philadelphia sports. I never knew he was from
if
Philadelphia.
you go back 100 years,
To the
from
20s,
the late
1920s.
teens to the 20s to the 30s to the 40s to 50s, Bill Tilden is one of the biggest names in American sports.
He wins 10 Grand Slams,
He
correct?
wins 10
In the 20s.
Grand Slams. Nobody is able to replicate that for decades. He accomplishes it by 1930 when he turns pro. It's not done again by an American until Pete Sampras does it near 2000. He is like this comet that goes through the skies and is so bright, it's stunningly bright that it could blind you. He's in all the newspapers on a daily basis. He's up there with Jack Dempsey and with
You call him the Babe Ruth of
Babe Ruth. I
tennis.
call him the Babe Ruth of tennis because he accomplished things. He's the first American-born tennis player to win Wimbledon. He wins it 3 times. He could have won it many more, but he didn't like to travel overseas. It was very difficult to travel back in that day.
He wasn't
just
allowed to
didn't-
play. You're right that he wasn't allowed to play in the
French.
20-something.
The French and the Australian, they didn't allow
They didn't even allow
foreigners
them
to play.
And he wasn't allowed on the U.S. Davis Cup.
That's right. Especially when he becomes pro, but he was the biggest thing, and he was a Philadelphian. He comes from Philly royalty in the sense that he came from a very prominent, accomplished Philly family. The father, William Tilden the first, was the head of the Union League 3 different times. Very, very prominent, and also instrumental in building many of the school buildings that exist in the city. He was a very articulate, hardworking, knowledgeable Republican businessman, but he was very honest and respected by everyone, including Democrats. And I believe that if he did have political aspirations and ran for mayor, he could have won because he not only came from the Republican elite, but he was respected and trusted by the Democrats and others. So he could have won, but he didn't have a great desire to be in politics, but American presidents came to meet with him because they knew how influential he was in Philadelphia. And he lived in a big mansion just about 40, 50 yards from Germantown cricket that I write a lot about in the book. And Germantown cricket and Bill Tilden go hand in hand. And Tilden not only is a great athlete, but he's very, very smart, very articulate. Even though he never graduates the University of Pennsylvania, he writes 25, 30 books. He writes hundreds of articles.
Even more than you.
Even more than me, and he actually played tennis better than me, which is hard to believe.
That's unreal. The neat thing I thought was like when he's in high school and college, he's not even that good. Or as far as, you know,
You're right
where he
on
gets
both
to
counts.
Yeah.
His
He didn't make the
college
made the team, but not.
That's right. His college career is unimpressive. At that point, he was fairly wild in the sense that he could hit some very, very impressive dramatic shots that people would go ooh and ah, as they do with some of mine, but also, like me, could hit a hell of a lot of unforced errors. He was erratic. But he's sort of a late bloomer.
Yeah.
As he gets older, he becomes more accomplished, and he devotes himself to mastering every stroke in the book. And you could argue, as I do, he's the first player, American, British, French, whatever, to perfect every stroke so that nobody could beat him. And he's unbeatable. And he wins three Wimbledon titles and 7 American titles, which were the big ones back in the 20s. Only later,
the
does
four
French
are still the same. The French and the Australian?
but the French and the Australian don't become major events for a number of years.
Until
it's
they allow
initially
everyone.
Wimbledon and the American title. And
So at that time, when we say there's 10, he won 10. There's only 2 a year to win.
That's right. The French and the Aussie don't come till a bit later.
Right. So if they were open,
And
possibly
the other
20,
thing,
possibly.
The other thing about Tilden, he's into the arts. He was not like the father into business. He was like his mother into music and into shows and plays and books. And so he spends a lot of time putting up his own money to fund plays on Broadway. He appears in plays. He appears in silent films. He's very much into the arts. He does a lot of writing. You can make the argument that he's one of the first and only Renaissance men. You know, I mean, when you start looking or use that term, Renaissance man, and you want to have one of the key features be athletic, how many folks can you come up with to designate individuals, male or female, who's a great athlete, but in addition to that, is great as a scientist or great as a writer or great as a thespian or what have you. But you can do that with Tilden. Regrettably, however, Tilden is gay, hides it fairly well until he's arrested in the mid-40s, about 1946.
You said 43 and
He's
46.
he's arrested.
In Hollywood. He's moved to Hollywood by now, right?
He goes to California, lives in California. A lot of the top players, the weather, you know, as we know, you know, they don't get too much snow in the Los Angeles area.
You can play all the time.
So he goes there, and he's a celebrity.
With a 16-year-old.
But he's arrested with a young kid. He lets the kid drive a car. Bill has his arm around him. One thing leads to another. He admits to it. He probably could have fought it and beat it, as many celebrities do today, but he didn't. He just wanted to get past it. He ends up doing 7 months at a work farm in Castaic, California. Was given a 1-year sentence, does 7 months on this farm, comes back out. Regrettably, he's arrested again 2 or 3 years later, does another 7 months. That pretty well shoots his reputation.
You think that's why he's thrown on the trash heap of
Yes, that's
sports
why he's
history?
forgotten. That's why most people, even tennis people, can't identify him.
Nothing in Philadelphia with him.
became-
No statues.
That's
no.
right. There's no statues. There's no monuments. There's no signs. The only thing I know of is the gravesite in Mount Airy,
Okay.
and the whole Tilden family is there. And you know, he was a dominant international figure. I tracked down people and folks who wrote about him in China, in Japan, in India. Babe Ruth was a phenomenal figure, but only here in America. They didn't know of him as France. They didn't know of him in Morocco. They didn't know of him in China.
It's tennis international.
That's right. Tennis is international, and Tilden is the biggest name. He writes all these books, and that's how people learn how to play, because of reading his book. And he's a stunningly impressive figure because he is articulate, is well-versed. He hung with all the top celebrities. They wanted to be with him because of his accomplishments and notoriety and whatever. But there is this very dark shadow over him, and that's why, there's so few things on him. I think my book is probably the best, certainly the most detailed.
And if anybody wants to read it, American Colossus, Big Bill Tilden, and the Creation of Modern Tennis. It was pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was pretty good. One more book left?
That's up to you.
Or
Remind me.
Klondike,
Oh,
Beethoven,
that's
is
another
that a
prison
book?
story.
Yeah.
That
Horrible.
is, yep. That's one that I found off and on in my readings of prison history. There was a situation in the late 1930s where prisoners were penalized for initiating a food strike and pressing the administration for some advancement in how they were treated. And the overseers of the prison at Holmesburg decided on a very, very hot August weekend to put the leaders, as they perceived them to be, in a small building between two cell blocks, a very small punishment building that held 12 cells, and put these men, I think there were about 20 or 22 of them in the cells. They shut all the windows, shut the air vents, and then turned up the heat. So these cell blocks, as I can vouch from my experience, magnify whatever the weather is outside. If it's 30 degrees outside, it's probably 20 in a cell block in a winter day. And just the opposite, if it's 90 degrees outside, it could be 110 in a cell block. So they shut all the windows, they turned off the water, they turned up the heat. They cooked the men alive, 1938. And when they came back after the weekend, they found a number of dead bodies and many others that were nearly dead. And it's a very, very dark, grim story that probably could make a hell of a movie in itself. But it's another Philadelphia story that even people in the criminal justice system aren't aware of.
You working on something now?
I just finished a novel. I don't read novels. I don't like novels, but
First fiction book?
most people do. If you go on the beach in Atlantic City or Wildwood or whatever, Jones Beach in New York, they're not reading about acres of skin. They're reading some other light fare that's a page turner. So I thought I would not only try to reach that audience, but test myself intellectually to see if I could write a novel, because it does take a different talent and style than straight history. And so I've written a book that's a fictionalized version of Acres of Skin. We hope that comes to the fore in the near future.
I had a tremendous time, and I really appreciate you
You
coming.
say that to all your guests.
No, most. But I do have a tremendous time. But this was a great hour and a half of learning about all your books and your life. Tremendous, really interesting.
Well, thank you.
Great Philadelphian life, which is what we bring here at Wit or Without.
I appreciate your interest. I appreciate you digging into this varied pieces of Philly history. And I can't wait till your series is nationally known.
Thank you. And we have a question for you, right, Michael?
Yeah. So, being from Philadelphia, you like cheesesteaks?
I do like them, but quite honestly, I refrain from them because I try to eat healthy, and especially after getting 2 stents and my father going down early, I try to stay away from meat.
Okay.
But if you want to seduce me, if you want to tempt me, I probably can be talked into it.
Wit or Without?
A little bit with.
Okay. You got it. I'm going to go cook. You finish.
Thank you very much, Alan. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, thank you.